My name is Matthew Cole. I'm 49 years old. I've spent most of my life working quietly, building a modest but solid career in finance. I never asked for much, never craved attention, and never made it anyone's business how well I was doing. After our parents passed, I took care of everything: the estate, the debts, even my younger sister Jenna. She was always the golden one, the dramatic one, the one who lived loud and expected the world to orbit her, and I never interfered, until the day she decided to treat me like a forgotten wallet instead of a brother. It started with silence. No invite, no save the date, nothing. I only found out Jenna was getting married from a family friend who assumed I was helping plan it. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a delay or a miscommunication, but as the months passed, I realized something chilling. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. No calls, no updates, not even a conversation. She had cut me out like a stranger. It hurt, but I said nothing. I've learned life speaks loudest in silence. Then came the envelope. Thick, glossy and embossed with her name and that of her fiancé Dylan. No, it wasn't a wedding invitation. It was a spreadsheet. Yes, a literal spreadsheet, breaking down costs of their luxury destination wedding and honeymoon in Bali. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was my suggested contribution, $80,000. And under it, a message in Dylan's words: "Be thankful we're letting you contribute. It's family tradition." I read the words twice, then again. Not a single greeting, no request, no apology for the exclusion. Just the assumption that I'd foot the bill, because I always had before, because I never said no, because I was quiet, dependable, and never made things messy. They thought I was easy to manipulate. They mistook maturity for weakness. And in that moment I realized they had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't argue. I didn't call. I didn't even text. I simply replied with 2 words: received, thanks. And then I did what I do best. I started calculating, not money, influence, power, leverage, because while they were busy designing floral arrangements and luxury photo booths, they had forgotten something. I own more than just a job title and a suit. I own the company that's sponsoring half of their wedding vendors. That's when the plan began to form. Not out of vengeance, but out of principle. You don't betray the one person who's protected you your entire life and expect to walk away untouched. I didn't want revenge for the pain. I wanted clarity. I wanted Jenna to see the value of what she discarded, not with yelling, not with confrontation, just quiet disruption. The kind that turns champagne dreams into a nightmare dressed in a tuxedo. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry. I've learned over the years that anger clouds strategy, but because I was rewatching every moment I'd spent supporting Jenna. The birthday parties I paid for in full when she was fresh out of college and broke. The down payment I helped her cover when she bought her first apartment. Even the quiet forgiveness I extended when she missed Mom's funeral rehearsal because of a spa appointment. I kept thinking, how many red flags did I excuse as just Jenna being Jenna? But what truly stung wasn't the money or even the lack of a wedding invitation. It was the reduction of our relationship to a transaction. I wasn't her brother anymore. I was her silent investor, a walking ATM with no emotional value. And Dylan, well, Dylan was a showman. He wore charm like cologne, strong at first, but shallow when you got too close. I remembered our first meeting. He introduced himself to me like I was some corporate executive he needed to impress. Now I realize he didn't see family. He saw funding. Still, I remained calm, because silence is power when used correctly. I started with a gentle inquiry to my operations manager. Which wedding vendors are we backing this quarter? You see, my company provides financing, and underwriting for high-end event businesses, florists, planners, luxury venues. Quietly, invisibly, we help make dream weddings happen. And Jenna's dream wedding? It was unknowingly built on my foundation. Poetic, isn't it? I didn't pull the plug. That would have been too obvious, too loud. Instead, I adjusted the terms of some vendor contracts. I raised minimum deposit requirements. I had our partner florists redirect inventory to a high-profile gala happening the same weekend. Nothing damaging, nothing illegal, just enough changes to force some unexpected costs and last-minute shortages. And all the while, I watched as Jenna's Instagram stories began to shift, from flawless excitement to subtle panic. Then came the group message from our extended relatives. Jenna had posted a public update. The wedding would be downsized for intimacy and personal reasons. No Bali, no five-star resort. Now it would be held in a local hall. Suddenly, the once grand affair she excluded me from was being crammed into something more modest, and I hadn't even raised my voice. The world she built without me was beginning to cave in, all on its own. But I wasn't done. I had something else planned, something far more surgical. I didn't want her to suffer financially. I wanted her to understand the cost of betrayal, the weight of silence, and the reality that when you cut off the hand that's been feeding you all your life, sometimes it doesn't reach back. The next phase wasn't about disruption, it was about reflection. I needed her to feel the consequences without ever knowing where they came from. That's the beauty of quiet power. It teaches lessons without leaving fingerprints. I reached out to a former colleague who now worked as a junior partner at a boutique financial advisory firm. They'd recently onboarded Dylan as a client. I simply asked, "How's his liquidity profile?" with a raised eyebrow over lunch. The response, laughter followed by, "He's trying to play high roller with credit cards and borrowed charm." That told me everything I needed to know. Dylan wasn't just arrogant, he was over-leveraged. Living above his means to impress, gambling with money that wasn't his, building dreams on a foundation of IOUs. And Jenna, blinded by excitement and status, couldn't see the storm building behind his smile. It wasn't my job to save her anymore. It was my opportunity to let her meet the reality she'd chosen. Meanwhile, I began reinforcing my own position. I instructed my legal team to revise the discretionary family support clause in my will and trust. Previously, Jenna was the secondary beneficiary after my future children, but with no appreciation, no boundaries, and no acknowledgement of all I'd done, I quietly redirected those funds into a scholarship program under our parents' names. One that would help young women with no support system, the kind of women Jenna never realized she once resembled. By now, the wedding vendors had begun quietly backing out. The venue changed again, from the hall to a rented Airbnb with a backyard tent. Jenna tried to keep up appearances, but the sparkle in her updates was dimmer. The guest list shrank. The honeymoon became a delayed adventure, with intimate plans and a local staycation. Friends began asking questions. Extended family whispered. The narrative unraveled, thread by thread with no visible hand pulling it apart. And still, I never said a word, never accused, never scolded. I simply let her feel the consequences of biting the hand that built her future. That $80,000 invoice? I paid exactly zero, but I made a larger investment in boundaries, in truth, and in the slow art of letting someone experience the mirror they've avoided all their life. One night, about 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a text, short, almost timid. It read, "Hey, didn't mean to shut you out. It's been a lot. Hope you're doing well. No apology, no ownership, just a flicker of discomfort from someone realizing their safety net had quietly stepped back." I stared at it for a while, Then I put the phone down and went for a walk. Not out of anger, but because I finally felt something I hadn't in years. The wedding came and went with little fanfare. I didn't attend, of course. I wasn't invited, not officially, anyway, but I heard through the grapevine that it was a far cry from the tropical fantasy Jenna once paraded online. No custom orchids flown in from Singapore, no private chef dinners on the beach. Just a windy backyard, plastic chairs and catered finger food from a local cafe. Intimate, yes, but not by design. It was a ceremony stitched together by pride and held up by borrowed smiles. I watched the photos trickle in on social media, carefully curated angles, close-ups to hide the missing grandeur, long captions about choosing love over extravagance. It almost worked, almost. But people aren't blind. Friends who had once envied her began to ask quiet questions. The influencers she tried to impress stopped sharing her content. There's something about a crumbling illusion that makes people uncomfortable, especially when it was built on arrogance. Dylan, I heard, was now struggling to maintain the facade. His job at the marketing firm had been cut to part-time after some poor client decisions. His side hustle, an overhyped crypto project, quietly collapsed. He'd put deposits down on multiple investments, most of them unsecured. Jenna was now living with the consequences of marrying someone who treated ambition like a performance instead of a responsibility, and for the first time, she couldn't call me to fix it. I had always been the fixer, the reliable brother in the background, but now I was invisible by choice. And that invisibility gave me perspective. I stopped checking her posts. I stopped wondering if she'd change. I started redirecting my time into building something meaningful, a mentorship group for young professionals who reminded me of who I was before I became the family wallet. People who listened, people who... Months passed. A mutual cousin reached out, said Jenna was going through a hard time. There was tension between her and Dylan. Financial stress, emotional distance. She'd mentioned me, said she missed her brother, that she wished things were different. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because I'd already made peace with the version of her I could no longer rescue. You see, forgiveness doesn't always mean restoration. Sometimes it means releasing the person entirely, letting them walk their road without your shadow to fall back on. And sometimes the most profound act of love is absence, not out of punishment, but out of self-respect. It was nearly a year later when I saw her again. Unexpectedly, I had been invited to speak at a local business forum, a modest event hosted at a community center downtown. As I stepped off the small stage shaking hands with a few attendees, I caught a glimpse of her, Jenna, standing quietly in the back, arms folded, eyes uncertain. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The weight of reality had pulled her down from the pedestal she once climbed so confidently. She waited until most people had cleared out before approaching. Her voice was soft, not theatrical like it used to be. "You look well," she said, searching my face for some clue of how much I hated her. But I didn't. I had moved beyond hate. I had risen into indifference, a place where love no longer hurts, because the expectations tied to it have been released. We spoke briefly, surface-level things. Her job, my work. No mention of the wedding, the bill, the betrayal. Just two people pretending time hadn't built walls between them. But in her eyes, I could see it. The shame, the confusion, the silent question, "Why didn't you save me this time?" And the answer was written in every decision she had made without me. You cannot shut someone out and still expect them to catch your fall. She didn't apologize. Not directly. But her final words hinted at something deeper. I've learned a lot this year about people, about pride, about grace. She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for money. and that, perhaps, was the greatest progress she'd ever made. I nodded, wished her well, and walked away, not as an act of bitterness, but of release. I wasn't punishing her. I was honoring myself. In the weeks that followed, I received a handwritten letter from her, the first one in years. She talked about Dylan's unraveling finances, the pressure of appearances, the deep loneliness that comes when the image of success collapses. She admitted she had pushed me away because she didn't want to be seen as needy. Ironically, she became everything she feared, dependent on someone who couldn't carry her. I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't forgiven her, but because I already had. The letter wasn't a request, it was a confession. And sometimes healing happens when we write things into the void, not knowing if anyone will write back. That was her step forward. My silence was mine, and in that silence I found peace. It's strange how peace doesn't come in the ways you expect. For years I thought closure would mean a conversation, a reconciliation, a moment where everything painful got unpacked and sorted like boxes in an attic. But real closure, I've learned, is quieter. It arrives without permission. It lives in the decision not to re-enter the same burning house just because someone left the door open again. Jen and I didn't become close again, but I stopped resenting that. I stopped wishing things would go back to some version of before that only existed in my mind. She made her choices, and I made mine, and both of us are living with them now. The difference is, I've found fulfillment, not just in boundaries, but in purpose. I now use my time, my wisdom, and even my resources to invest in people who value them, people who listen, people who grow. The scholarship I created in our parents' name has already sent 3 young women to university. Each of them wrote me a letter. Each of them expressed more gratitude in a paragraph than Jenna ever had in 3 decades. And that filled the space in me that used to ache from her absence. It reminded me that you can't force love to be reciprocated, but you can always redirect it where it will bloom. I still get updates through the family. Dylan lost another job, and they moved to a smaller apartment. Jenna picked up work as a freelance event planner, which I hope teaches her humility. Life has a way of circling back with lessons, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted. She's learning now what I spent years enduring in silence, and maybe that's enough. As for me, I've never been more at peace. No bitterness, no revenge fantasy, just a quiet, satisfied sense that I handled everything with grace, that I didn't stoop, I didn't explode, and I didn't become what hurt me. I simply stepped back and let the truth do its work. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not fire or fury, but flourishing where they thought you'd fade. It was sometime in spring when I met Amara, a 28-year-old scholarship recipient who asked if I'd mentor her through her first business pitch. She had that same quiet fire I used to see in myself, back when I was young and underestimated. She reminded me that my story didn't end with being discarded by family. It was reborn in what I chose to build afterward. Mentoring her wasn't just rewarding, it was healing. She didn't know my story. She didn't know Jenna. She didn't need to. All she knew was that someone believed in her, and that made me realize you don't need to hold on to old relationships just because they share your blood. Sometimes the people who carry your legacy are the ones who show up after the pain, not during it. I helped Amara secure her first round of funding. I watched her stand in front of a room full of skeptics, pitch her dream, and leave with a standing ovation. I thought of Jenna then, of how different life could have been if she'd chosen partnership over pride, but instead of feeling sorrow, I felt clarity. I wasn't her stepping stone anymore. I was a bridge for others. That moment redefined success for me. It wasn't the car, the house, the digits in my account. It was the legacy of quiet impact. the ability to lift someone else without needing applause. I had found something more valuable than recognition. I had found peace in becoming invisible and still being powerful. And that's when I knew. I didn't need Jenna's apology. I didn't need her to to me anymore. I had finally seen myself not as the brother who got left behind, but as the man who walked ahead. Months later, I received another letter, not from Jenna this time, but from Dylan, that surprised me. His tone was defensive at first, blaming financial hardships and misunderstandings. He wrote as if I'd done something to wrong them. But by the third paragraph, his bravado cracked. He asked for a meeting, said he wanted to talk man to man. I almost threw it away, but something told me to wait. Not because I owed him anything, I didn't, but because sometimes seeing someone face their downfall up close isn't about revenge, it's about witnessing what pride ultimately costs. So I agreed to meet on neutral ground at a quiet cafe near the harbor. Dylan looked thinner, tired. His designer bravado was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made his coffee cup tremble in his hand. He didn't offer a real apology, but he did admit that he was in over his head, that he'd treated Jenna like a prize, not a partner, that their wedding, the one he wanted so desperately to make grand, had ruined more than just their bank account. It had fractured their trust. He asked me point blank if I would help him, not financially, just advice, direction. I stared at him for a long time, then said, "Start by learning to live without image. Learn to love what's real." I got up, left some cash for the bill, and walked out. I didn't need to fix anything. That's not my role anymore. I am not the rescuer. I am not the bank. I am simply... After that meeting with Dylan, I didn't think much more about them. But people talk, especially family, and slowly news began to travel, not in scandal, but in sighs and subtle statements. A cousin told me Jenna had taken a part-time job at the very catering company she once hired for her wedding. Another mentioned she'd moved in with a friend after separating from Dylan. No drama, no big announcement, just a quiet unraveling of the stories she once broadcast like royalty. It didn't bring me satisfaction the way I once thought it might. There was no victory lap, just a soft, internal nod that affirmed something I had long suspected. People eventually confront the truth they avoid. Life doesn't let you pretend forever, and when the performance ends, what's left behind is who you really are. In Jenna's case, the applause had faded, and now she had to face herself. What struck me most wasn't her downfall, but the way others in the family started treating me differently. For years I was just the older brother, the background supporter, the silent helper. But now, unprovoked, people began thanking me, saying things like, "I never realized how much you held us all together," or "You always had a calm strength." I didn't need their praise, but it revealed something profound. Even when you're invisible, your impact isn't. I began receiving invitations I hadn't seen in years, dinners, birthdays, small gatherings, not because they needed something, but because they finally saw me. Maybe they recognized how I'd carried burdens no one noticed, or maybe Jenna's fall made them rethink who they had overlooked. Either way, I didn't gloat. I just showed up with grace. At one of those dinners, an aunt whispered, "She talks about you all the time now, you know. She says you were the only one who truly loved her without needing to be seen." I nodded, said nothing, because that was never the point. Love, real love, doesn't demand a spotlight. It holds firm in the shadows, and sometimes it walks away, not to punish, but to preserve. That was the season I truly became untouchable, not because I built walls, but because I built peace. I never received another letter. No dramatic reunion, no teary call in the middle of the night. And that was fine. Redemption, I learned, doesn't always circle back with ribbons and closure. Sometimes it stays distant, it watches from afar, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is continue to live fully, unapologetically, and without need for validation. One afternoon, I walked past a small storefront with a faded sign, Jenna May Events. It was her trying to rebuild, I assume. It looked humble, nothing flashy. A couple of chairs, a corkboard of sample setups, and a pot of dying flowers in the window. I paused, just for a moment. Part of me wanted to walk in to say, "I'm proud of you for trying," but I didn't, because this wasn't my story anymore. It was hers. I turned and kept walking, and with each step, I felt lighter. Not because I'd won, but because I was no longer carrying what wasn't mine. I had loved her as best I could. I had stood in the fire without asking for recognition. And when it became clear that love had turned into expectation and entitlement, I had chosen the road less traveled, quiet release. You don't always get the ending you imagined, but you do get the chance to become someone stronger, softer, wiser, and in my case, someone who could finally say, "I am not who they think I am who I've built myself to be." That truth? That's the real inheritance. It's been nearly 3 years since that envelope arrived. The one that wasn't an invitation, but a declaration, a bold demand wrapped in entitlement. Looking back now, it's hard to believe that a simple bill for $80,000 could have ignited such a quiet transformation in me. Not because of the money, but because of what it revealed, who they thought I was, and who I truly am. I no longer live in the shadow of family obligations. I no longer feel guilt for choosing peace over performance, boundaries over approval. I've built something better, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. My days are slower now, my mornings quieter. I sip my coffee and mentor a handful of young entrepreneurs, many of whom remind me of the version of myself that used to apologize for taking up space. One of them asked me recently, "How did you learn to let go without bitterness?" I told him this because I finally understood that closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you give yourself when you stop arguing with reality. I stopped expecting apologies. I stopped rehearsing what I would say if they ever came back. And instead, I started building a life that didn't require their permission. I don't check Jenna's social media anymore. I don't ask mutual family members about her. Not because I'm cold, but because healing means trusting people to walk their own road, even if it winds through failure. I wish her no harm. In fact, I hope she grows. I hope she becomes the woman I once believed she could be. But her story is hers now. And mine? Mine is finally mine. You see, I was never the villain. I was never the fool. I was simply the one who loved silently, gave too much, and stayed too long, until I didn't. Until I learned that quiet doesn't mean weak, and that when you walk away with your dignity intact, you don't lose, you evolve. So if you're watching this, wondering whether it's time to reclaim your peace, to draw the line, to stop fixing what someone keeps breaking, let this be your sign. Let them underestimate you. Let them call you heartless. Let them think you walked away too soon. Because one day, they'll realize you were the blessing they buried. And by then you'll be too far ahead to hear their regrets echo behind you.